Welcome to podcast number 8. With this podcast, we're going to continue our series of Order of the Sport. And today we're going to talk about the number 3 thing on our list of Order of the Sport, and that is bike placement. We'll skip back a little bit and remind you of the first 2 things. First order of the sport was vision and focus, our eyes and focus. Second one was motor controls. Well, now we're going to work on that third thing and talk about that third thing, which is our bike placement. And what that really means with bike placement is we need a goal. And we also want to make sure that we're taking advantage of everything that the track has to offer to get us to that goal. And what that goal is the part where we can start to accelerate and not have to give the throttle back up. That's what we want. So as we go back and remember, what's the quickest way around the racetrack? And if you've listened to my other podcasts, you've heard me define that before, which is the rider that can be at wide open throttle the earliest or the longest is the rider that's going to have the best lap time. That's how we get that. We want to start thinking about our riding as feet per second. So it's when we can be at full throttle. It's when we can initiate that drive off the corner and not have to give the throttle back up. That's really what everything with bike placement is to do, is to get us to that point. So when we define bike placement, it's really when you have exit direction. That's really what it is. So as we go through this, we want to start working that equation backwards. So bike placement is when we have exit direction. But now, to take advantage and adjust for every corner and every radius, we have to start looking at the track. We have to start looking at all the different controls that allow us to be able to do that. So we have an end goal, exit direction. That's our goal. But now we have to work backwards and start looking at all the things that gets us in that spot. And that's the rest of the bike placement, right? That's adjusting for the radius, adjusting your brake pressure, your foot peg pressure, where you release the brakes, your turning rate and your turning point. All of those things are incorporated into bike placement. And a couple statements on that is one, I asked, we actually had a fun guest at our first Rick development camp last week. He sticks his head in the first day and is Jeff Sesmat, the data acquisitions technician on the Graves Yamaha team. And I completely asked Jeff this question in front of everybody out of the blue. And I said, Jeff, what's the fastest way around the racetrack? And he thinks about it for a second, and he says, well, it's the rider that has the longest acceleration zone and the shortest braking zone. And then I explained to him what I felt the fastest way around the racetrack was. And he goes, well, yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about, right? The rider that's accelerating the longest is going to have the best lap time. So we need a spot that's consistent and predictable to do that. We need to have that report card for that. And now all those other things are what helps get us to that point. And it's funny, when you look at the first 2 things of the order of the sport, now you can understand why this all starts to make sense. Because to get us that, first of all, we have to see it and we have to be focused on it. And that's why, number 1, we've got our vision and focus. Now we also have to have motor controls that allow us to adjust for that. So now you can see why this is the third order of the sport, but we have to put ourselves in a position to be able to adjust for that. I think a really neat thing that Casey Stoner said at the end of his championship year when he won on the Ducati is they asked him, well, gosh, you're riding this crazy bike and nobody else can ride this bike. What is making you different on this? And he says, well, yes, I'm having to ride the bike really hard. But he goes, I think you're missing something. And he goes, I have a distinct advantage. He goes, I feel that I can adjust for every corner a little bit better than everybody else. So let that sink in for just a second. He's able to read the radiuses a little bit differently, the cambers. He's able to read where his bike placement is better than everybody else's so he can obtain that goal. That's what we're looking at. I have to give a big shout out to Josh Hayes on this. I think Josh Hayes has got some of the best bike placement in the business. If you just, you watch him ride, where he puts the bike to get his goal, in other words, to get it where he can start to open the throttle and not have to give it back up, is better than everybody else's. He looks at where his turning rate is and his turning point and how much brake pressure and how much body he has to use to get him to that point. So the bike placement is a really big deal. And it's not something that we have to spend a huge amount of time talking about, but it absolutely is relevant in your riding because it really is the start of the process of being able to have a report card for what you're doing. First of all, we had to put you in that position, right, with your eyes, your focus, and your motor controls. But why are we doing that? To put you in this spot so you can have a consistent and predictable place to be accelerating from. So once again, you have that, then all the things that you start to adjust, right? You can adjust your turning rate and your turn point, for instance, and realize, oh, was that better to get me to my spot or not as good to get me to my spot? Oh, I released the brakes a little bit earlier. Did I get to that point earlier or did I get to that point later? Did I not get direction earlier? So that's why we have to have that spot. That is our goal in our riding. And all these other things help us to get to that spot. So with bike placement, we really want to make sure we understand bike placement. It's where we have exit direction. It's where we can start to add throttle and not have to give it up. Then you can start thinking about, when am I at wide open throttle? And then as you work that equation backwards, you can start to look at, okay, well, how long am I using my brakes? How is my foot peg pressure as I turn my body in? Am I entering the track to maximize the radius for that particular corner to get to that spot? So that statement of bike placement, yes, it's very encompassing, but it absolutely has one very, very precise goal, and that's when we have exit direction. So get your track maps out, start thinking about where you have exit direction, and then start looking at what comes before it and what comes after it to maximize that feet per second, to maximize that amount of acceleration time. And this will really change your riding of when you look at the MotoGP riders, you say, well, gosh, why are they putting their bike there? And how come they're not using all the track there, but they're using all the track there? And it simply comes down to their bike placement for what lasts longest and not losing sight of that goal of exit direction. So this is a fun one, but you can also see why we've placed it in the order that we have. So thanks everybody for tuning in. I also appreciate a lot of the requests that I've been getting. I'm building a list, but we're going to continue with the order of the sport and keep your guys' brains engaged. Thanks so much.